Hi, howdy. I'm Danny Baranowsky. I do like music stuff, and I thought one question I get a lot from developers and stuff is just like, how do you choose what kind of music to put in the games, that kind of stuff. And since a lot of developers aren't musicians and are always depending on one, thought I'd go through kind of what my thoughts are as to why composers make certain decisions and how to decide the pace and rhythm and all that kind of stuff for their game. So what might not be apparent to non-musicians is that the pace of the music needs to match the pace of the game. If we want to get all dictionary on it, rhythm is a strong, regular, repeated pattern of movement or sound. I think you could define gameplay in a similar way. Games are often a pattern of repeated actions. Unlike music, though, the rhythm of gameplay is not defined. Designers can determine the scope of the possible interactions, but the actual interactions will never be under your direct control. So I came up with a basic kind of list of game music intensities, kind of less intense to more. So you got your turn-based point-and-click games, Desktop Dungeons, Slay the Spire. Less interaction, but still real-time, like Blush and Journey. And I try to get my own games in here, too, because I'm super into myself. Action games and platformers, like Super Meat Boy and More Now. Rhythm games like Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule, insane reflex and planning game, and this is kind of where my thesis all falls apart, but you're gonna have to just stick with me. But like StarCraft, Super Hexagon, stuff that just requires constant crazy amounts of interaction like every second. It's also, this is just a good excuse to have a captive audience to listen to my music, which is super sick. So turn-based, point-and-click games. Here's an example from Desktop Dungeons. So Desktop Dungeons is a turn-based game. You have to clear all the enemies off the map, maintaining your health and mana. You have to make decisions when to attack, when to recharge. Totally turn-based, but it's just this high fantasy aesthetic, art's dense in details, tons of different locations, all that kind of stuff. So for this one, I decided to go for a more cinematic approach, memorable melodies, but at a pace that wouldn't tire people out after hearing it loop constantly. It's challenging to make this decision on pace when there's no gameplay to work with, but it does offer much more flexibility as far as how you want the music to sound. Fellow musicians might understand that when you tell us to do whatever, it's fucking awesome and terrifying at the same time. So I approached it as an exercise in aesthetics. I just wanted to match the tenor and the attitude of the world, match the abstraction of the game. So this track is for a level kind of based on the Three Billy Goats Gruff and the Troll Under the Bridge. And I kind of pulled on my memories of Peter and the Wolf for like melodramatic use of character themes and stuff. So there's goats walking across the bridge. Meh. So one thing you might notice about that is that the tempo is not steady. And that's one of the things that I think is a lot easier to do in turn-based and like point-and-click adventure kind of stuff, because you have no pace to match, so you do that. Similar example, this is Slay the Spire, by Clark Abood. It's an amazing soundtrack. Slay the Spire got a lot of attention for its mechanics, but less so for its presentation in music. It's not like a standard fantasy thing. It's like this weird pseudo-futurish kind of thing. It would have been a mistake to go for like standard fantasy music, and Clark avoided that wisely. So although Slay the Spire is turn-based, there are still things you can lean on to determine the pace of the music. The animations when you play a card, the speed at which the map scrolls when a new level is loaded, the time it takes for a new screen to show up or confirm a choice. Even if it's a turn-based game, there's going to be a pace and rhythm to elements of the game. that was kind of a terrible example because the guy was like speed running, but trust me, when you play normally, it works. So the next one is what I would call less interaction real time, or LERTs. LERTs feature real-time interaction but have less punctuated constant pace than the games higher on the list. Primary goal in the music here should be reinforce the idea of like a more laid-back pace, but give the player a gentle push to continue on. The Blush is a game I did many years ago in Unity in the browser. Remember that? And so I wrote a track that kind of accentuates the slower pace. Here. So again, you can even just see like the speed at which the tentacles kind of move around and the speed at which you're able to pick up new items. Your composer can feel that out. So yeah, you get the idea. Another game I'm working on right now is Industries of Titan from Brace Yourself. It's a city builder. You know, these guys are working on it. Don't listen to them. Titan's a city builder in a dystopian future. The decisions are virtually all long-term planning and forethought. The aesthetic influence is clear. Vangelis, Blade Runner, cyberpunk in general. Uncertainty of a hyper-capitalist dominated future is accentuated by music that isn't always on the beat, and it's unpredictable as to what happens next. You shouldn't be comfortable in Titan, and the music is intended to reinforce that through its rhythm or lack of rhythm. And some of the synths are out of tune there. That was totally on purpose, right? Because everything's like not cool. I don't know. Anyway, Journey is a game that has a somewhat faster pace of interaction than turn-based game, but not by much. There's rarely time-sensitive inputs required. It's much more about exploring the world, forming a bond with a stranger. The music is far more invested in selling the emotional experience of the game. But the motion that it does imply is kind of a floaty motif. I think most of us probably played Journey, and you know, it's a lot of, you know, that's the scarf. Like, so it's not always, but a lot of times when there is like heavy rhythmic elements in Journey, it feels like you're floating around with a scarf. So yeah, if you played Journey, you know it's not that the whole time. There's a lot of different spots where it's a much more flowing and open. One thing to keep in mind with all this is that different segments of the game can require different approaches. You can't do really like a monolithic thing through the whole thing. But the next intensity is like action games, platformers. There's a ton of games that fall in this category. I think action is kind of a meaningless word for genre classification, but it's a useful signifier for pace. Games are generally about timing, planning, and execution on a shorter time scale, seconds rather than minutes or hours. These are ones where you can really feel out the tempo of the game within seconds of playing, whether you realize it or not. It makes it much more important that you match the rhythm effectively. So Super Meat Boy was pretty, this one's pretty straightforward. There's a fucking chainsaw chasing you. An example when subtlety is not required. One thing to notice here is that even in the most intense times, you need a break. Tempo is still the same. There's a thing going in the background moving. So your internal pace is still moving, but you're not being, well, now you are again getting hit with the drums. So another great example. I love this game, Mordhau. Big beefy men hitting each other with sticks. And doesn't always have to be directly patterned after the moment-to-moment stuff. In Mordhau, the inputs are even more predictable since it's a multiplayer game. The composer went with a tonal focus here. But if you kind of imagine yourself swinging a battle axe at the pace of this music, it just feels right. There's rim hits and clicks in the background that stay constant among the periodic slams of the string instrument and the drum hits. The battle's still going on, even amid the trauma of each momentary weapon impact. Fucking love that game, and I will duel anybody here and beat you with my Bardiche fans out there. It's good. Okay, so sometimes though, cartoonish is exactly what you're looking for. Cuphead is an exercise in tribute to an existing aesthetic. The challenge I'm sure the composer faced is that cartoon music is often disjointed and random in its rhythm to match the madness on screen. It's actually pejoratively called Mickey Mousing, and it's often used when it comes to film score, when the score is too closely tied to the events occurring, going, that's the stairs. It makes it sound cartoonish. The frenetic jazz that accompanies Cuphead is both tonally appropriate and that it matches the time period and animation they're conjuring, but also keeping that Mickey Mousey feel with the improvisational nature of jazz. So the next one's the easy one, rhythm games. Rhythm games know what they want. Necrodancer has a very simple conceit. You get one move per beat. The primary constriction on the music is that every single beat must be readable to the player so they can make that choice effectively, even if they aren't a musician with years of training on how to keep the beat. There's no room here for changing tempos, even any breaks. Every beat must be filled, so there isn't a lot of room for variation. Well, we did do a thing in Zone 3, and my iPad just went to YouTube. I don't want that. And we're back. In Zone 3, there's a hot and cold side of the level that you can crossfade between, and that introduces some variety. Cadence of high roll, there's combat, peaceful, and lo-fi versions of every track. It's really easy to tire people out with constant beats, constant high-intensity music. So having any kind of transitions or breaks while retaining the pace of the game is super important. You can make the player better at the game just by leveraging their innate understanding of rhythm. Most people do have rhythm, they just don't know it. Every single non-musician is just like, I don't have rhythm. It's like, have you ever tried? No, probably not. It was funnier in my head. So here again, it's still intense, but there's less rhythm between the beats. So rhythmically, you're giving people a little bit of a break. See that internal pulse is still there, but you're not slamming people on every beat. Beat Saber. Y'all like Beat Saber? I like Beat Saber. It's masterfully matched the gameplay, the music in this game. This track strongly accentuates the upbeat to give the listener a lift on beats 2 and 4, and the targets you have in the game take into consideration. With a game like this that literally requires your whole body to play, implying this kind of movement into the track itself makes the whole thing greater than the sum of its parts. You can make, I already said that, most people have rhythm. Did you know that? I kind of feel like moving just watching this video.
I don't know what to do or say, but I know what I need. If you wanna escape with me, come take my hand. Let me show you another way to a better land, a better land.
I just want to play Beat Saber. We got time? Can I get a round out here? Okay. So I had no good name for this category, but this is kind of like the full circle kind of thing. Some pretty wildly disparate examples here. StarCraft and Super Hexagon. Completely different games, but the number of inputs per minute, APM if you're in the know, are very high. So different approaches here. StarCraft is a game, like most multiplayer games for me, where you derive humiliation from 14-year-olds. But the nature of StarCraft's interaction is rapid. Probably more actions per minute than most rhythm games, even. RTS and strategy games kind of occupy their own approach here, since it's a relatively long-form genre. Game lengths can vary from 15 minutes to hours or days. The potential universe of interactions is so large. Many of these games adopt a musical strategy of scoring the longer arc of the experience rather than the moment-to-moment gameplay. There's often breaks between these tracks, and the music serves to get the player feeling like the general commanding the battle rather than being in the battle. SCV reporting. Don't you just feel like ordering troops to their death now? So on the other hand, there's Super Hexagon. It's a game about like killing hexagons with a triangle or something. I never played it, but it's action on an impossibly short time scale. While StarCraft requires you to have this overarching strategy on top of quick reaction times, Super Hexagon is focused solely on the reaction times. I love Chipsel. Everybody loves Chipsel. I can't imagine a better soundtrack to this game. The tempo is tuned perfectly to the speed of the decisions you need to make. The melodies are never too complex that they'll distract you. The repeating motifs maintain your trance. Anyone who plays Super Hexagon, you get in that trance. There are still drops in intensity, but their eventual resurgence keeps your attention focused, again, without exhausting your ears. All right, so please consider your game's rhythm is virtually always going to be something you have to just feel out. Your composer can help with this. Here's some things you can communicate to help us determine the right pace for your game's music and get that conversation started. Have an idea how much of the music's impact should come from the vibe and how much should come from the pulse. If you're much more focused on the storytelling, world building, that kind of stuff, then the vibe should take precedence. And if it's an action-y, percussive game, basically, you want to focus more on the pulse and the rhythm of it. Think about how different areas, screens, and phases of the game should feel. Should the menu before a battle be pumping you up or making you dread entering it? Leave room for silence. This is something a lot of games do not do, and they should, unless it's absolutely necessary. Quiet or silent time is crucial to contextualize the parts with music. You can tire a player with music easily, especially if it loops. Make sure there's dynamic shifts, loud parts and soft parts to keep it interesting. Reinforce the idea that your game is a collection of shifting states and not just a static thing. So rhythm is cool, and y'all have it. That's the end of my talk.